Syl lets toxic stepdad neglect his boys. Niece is kicked out. My husband and I have always been close to Barbara, my sister-in-law, who is now 41. We've been through enough with her over the years to feel like we know her inside out. She has faced more than her share of rough patches, mostly due to the men she's been with, and her life has become an unending cycle of heartbreak and repair. But despite everything, she's tried to hold her life and family together for her, raising 4 boys in an environment that, while imperfect, was at least stable in its routine. That was, until her choice to stay with Reese, a man who has been in and out of her life for years, turned into something of a nightmare. Barbara's boys, Luke, Owen, Ryan, and little Calvin, are each unique in their personalities and temperaments. Luke, the eldest at 17, has always seemed the most sensitive, perhaps because he's witnessed the ups and downs of Barbara's relationships the longest. Owen, who is 14, is more withdrawn, keeping his struggles private, but feeling things deeply. Ryan, at 13, has a good nature, but has started showing signs of frustration with everything going on. And Calvin, just 7, is the one we worry about most. He's still so young, and in so many ways, he's a blank slate absorbing everything around him. Barbara's past relationships haven't exactly set her up for success. She's dated men who brought her down, men who failed to respect her, and worst of all, men who left her feeling like she wasn't worth more. But Reese is in a category all his own. He has been the only constant partner in her life, though partner might be too generous a term. Reese is 48, a man with a stable job, but a shaky sense of responsibility. His routine consists of working his job, blowing his paychecks on gambling binges, and when he's home, adding little but stress to the household. His presence has always been more of a storm cloud than a source of security, yet Barbara continues to cling to the hope that he'll change. For the past 7 years, she's confided in us about Reese's behavior. She tells us about the nights he doesn't come home, the money that disappears on his gambling nights, and his blatant disregard for family commitments. She's come to us in tears, claiming she's finally had enough, that she's ready to break free. But like clockwork, she goes back. Reese always seems to worm his way back into her life with an apology or a story about how he'll improve. We've heard this so many times, and yet each time Barbara returns to him, she looks a little more worn, a little more defeated. Back in 2020, we reached a breaking. After yet another explosive argument between Barbara and Reese, our entire family staged an intervention. It was clear that this was no longer just about Barbara. Her boys were beginning to suffer from the constant turmoil. So we gathered, sitting her down in the family living room, trying to make her understand that we were there to support her in whatever way she needed. We offered her options, lawyers to help her with divorce proceedings, a safe place to stay for her and the boys, even legal assistance if it came to that. The entire family was on board, ready to rally around her. Barbara, to our surprise, agreed. She admitted that she was tired, that Reese had taken everything out of her, and that it was time to make a change. She was going to kick him out, she told us, with a tearful resolve that, for once, looked unbreakable. We all breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that maybe this time it would stick. But the optimism didn't last. 6 months passed, and then Reese was back, supposedly because he couldn't find a place to stay. This man, who had held a steady job for 20 years, claimed he was unable to find or afford a place of his own. It was a flimsy excuse, but Barbara, despite everything, let him in. The situation only worsened from there. Barbara decided to try marriage counseling, latching onto the idea that she could somehow save her marriage. She talked about honoring her vows and creating a better environment for them. No matter how much we argued, no matter how many times we pointed out the damage being done, she was set on the idea that this was the right thing to do. Reese, of course, attended a few sessions, but showed no real commitment. He would go, sit in silence, and leave. The counseling wasn't helping. If anything, it seemed to justify his behavior as something they were working on, rather than addressing the core issues tearing the family apart. As the months passed, Barbara's boys started to feel the effects of this turbulent relationship. Luke, who was always the most empathetic and introspective, took it especially hard. He began skipping school, spending days away from home, and eventually started smoking. It wasn't just about rebelling. It was as though he was trying to escape the reality of what his family had become. Luke had once been an honor roll student, someone who dreamed of going to college and making something of himself. But now, he seemed adrift, lost in a home environment where he felt neglected and unseen. The turning point came late one night. At 2 in the morning, my husband's phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Luke. His voice was shaky, filled with despair as he confessed that he was feeling suicidal. He was afraid, he said, of what he might do to himself. Without hesitating, my husband and I jumped out of bed, threw on our coats, and rushed to Barbara's house where Luke was waiting. But when we got there, we discovered something that made our blood boil. Luke had tried to tell Reese about his feelings earlier that night, to open up about the darkness weighing him down. And Reese's response? He told him, "Just do it because no one would care." Hearing this, my husband lost it. He confronted Reese right then and there, and in a fit of anger and frustration, he He punched him in the face. It wasn't just the physical blow that mattered. It was an eruption of all the anger and helplessness we had been feeling for years. We took Luke to the hospital that night, making sure he was safe and getting the help he needed. When he was released, we brought him back to our home, where he stayed for 3 weeks. During that time, we did everything we could to create a supportive environment for him, trying to help him heal from the trauma that his own family life had inflicted on him. Eventually, Luke decided he was ready to return to his mom's house. He thought that, after the hospital stay and the time away, maybe things would be different. Maybe the wake-up call had been enough to set some changes in motion, but it wasn't long before everything unraveled again. Luke's younger brother, Owen, soon began showing signs of strain as well. He started to act out, clearly struggling with the stress of his home environment. For months, he and Barbara were constantly at odds, fighting nearly every day. We could see that the situation was wearing him down, but we didn't realize just how bad things had gotten. One day, we tried to reach out to check in on. Calls went unanswered, texts left unread. Barbara had gone silent, something that worried us deep. We hadn't heard from her or the boys in days, and every passing hour without a response made us more anxious. In the end, my husband decided to go over there in person, something our family often did just to drop by unannounced, sometimes with treats or just to say hello. But this time, it wasn't for a casual visit. It was to make sure everyone was safe. When he arrived, what he found shocked him to the core. Barbara, fed up with what she described as disrespect from Luke and Owen, had decided to wash her hands of them. She had kicked them out of the house. Not only that, but she had gone so far as to turn off their phones, cutting them off from any form of contact. She had no idea where they were, or even if they were safe. We later found out that the boys had been staying with friends, embarrassed and struggling, trying to get by on their own. Once we located them, we brought them home with us. Luke and Owen opened up to us about the bullying and fighting they had been enduring at home. They told us how unsafe and unsupported they felt. When we confronted Barbara about it, she admitted to kicking them out, but insisted that they were exaggerating, that things weren't as bad as they claimed. It was clear she was unwilling or unable to see the impact of her choices on her sons. Continuing from the point where we took in Luke and Owen, it felt surreal to sit with them and listen, as they finally had a safe place to share everything they had been enduring. They were still processing the shock and confusion of being cast out by their own mother, a betrayal that neither of them had fully come to terms with. Their faces showed a mix of hurt, frustration, and relief. They were safe now, but the scars of feeling unwanted were already settling in. They sat across from us trying to be strong, but the weight of what they'd been through was written all over them. We found out that they had been living on the generosity of friends, bouncing from couch to couch. They kept a low profile because, as they confessed with downcast eyes, they were embarrassed. They didn't want their friends or their friends' parents to know the whole story, and certainly not how deep the issues went. It hurt to hear them talk about the bullying they'd faced from their stepfather, Reese, and the constant fighting that had torn apart any sense of security they might have had in their own home. They described scenes where they would be shouted at and told they were ungrateful or disrespectful. Anytime they tried to stand up for themselves or express their feelings, it turned into a fight, with Reese belittling them and Barbara, often enough, siding with. Sitting there, hearing it all, my husband and I felt a range of emotions that was hard to describe. We were angry, yes, furious at Reese's heartless treatment of the boys, and at Barbara for allowing it. But more than that, we were heartbroken for Luke and Owen, two young men who had been denied the safety and support they deserved. When we asked them if they wanted to go back, their response was immediate and emphatic. They didn't feel safe there, they told us plainly. They didn't trust Reese, and they had lost faith in their mother's willingness to protect. When we reached out to Barbara to confront her about everything, she admitted she had put them out. But in typical fashion, she downplayed the severity of it, saying they were simply exaggerating. She claimed that Luke and Owen were being difficult, that they'd crossed the line with their disrespect, and that she just needed a break from the constant conflict. She painted a picture of herself as a mother at the end of her rope, overwhelmed by two rebellious teenagers. But to us, it felt like deflection, an attempt to justify what we saw as a grave betrayal. How could she not realize the toll this was taking on them? That conversation with Barbara was the tipping point for us. We were at a crossroads. Do we keep trying to manage this within the family? Or do we report this and let the authorities step in? My husband and I both felt like the boys' situation had gone beyond what we could fix with family discussions. To us, this was a clear case of neglect, maybe even abandonment. They were minors, cast out and left to fend for themselves, forced to rely on the kindness of friends because they didn't feel safe in their own home. We were ready to take this to protective services, to the police, anyone who could intervene and ensure these boys were protected. But the rest of the family wasn't on the same page. When we brought up our concerns, they argued that calling CPS was an extreme response, one that would bring permanent consequences and likely fracture the family. They wanted to handle it internally, believing that we could somehow support the boys without involving outsiders. They insisted that Barbara's actions, while troubling, didn't warrant involving the authorities. They argued that Barbara was just going through a tough time and that we should be helping her, not punishing. In their eyes, we were overreacting. They urged us to consider how this would affect the family dynamic and reminded us that, at the end of the day, Luke and Owen were not our rent. The family members advocating for this approach seemed more concerned about preserving peace within the family than addressing the very real harm being done to these boys. The implication was clear: keep this quiet, keep this private, and just deal with it as best we could without drawing outside attention. It was infuriating. We couldn't understand how the rest of the family could look at this situation and not see it for what it was. These weren't just family issues that could be swept under the rug. Luke and Owen had been abandoned, cut off from any parental support, and left to navigate a situation no teenager should ever have to face. They had been made to feel like burdens in their own home, and now they were being told, in essence, that their pain wasn't significant enough to warrant outside help. My husband and I went back and forth, struggling to reconcile the family's perspective with our own sense of responsibility. We knew that calling CPS could have lasting consequences for Barbara, that it might set off a chain of events that would be difficult to reverse. But we also knew that leaving this unaddressed would mean abandoning Luke and Owen, leaving them vulnerable to further mistreatment and emotional damage. After countless discussions and sleepless nights, we reached a decision. We couldn't in good conscience turn a blind eye to what was happening. We believed that the well-being of these boys was more important than avoiding family conflict. If protecting them meant alienating certain family members or dealing with anger and judgment, so be it. We were ready to go full nuclear, as we'd come to call it, and bring this to the attention of anyone who could help. That weekend, we sat Luke and Owen down and explained our decision to them. We wanted them to know that, as far as we were concerned, their safety and happiness came first. We told them that we planned to report everything that had happened, from the neglect and emotional abuse to the incidents that had led them to leave their home. They didn't say much in response, but the look in their eyes was one of relief. They didn't want to go back. They were afraid of going back, and knowing that we were willing to stand up for them seemed to lift some of the weight they'd been carrying. In the days that followed, we began to gather the necessary information and make the calls. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like we were taking a hammer to the foundation of our family. The rest of the family found out about our decision, and the backlash was immediate. Some members outright refused to speak to us, calling us out for betraying Barbara and dragging our private issues into the public sphere. Others reached out in anger, accusing us of taking things too far, of making things worse by bringing in outside authority. But through it all, we reminded ourselves why we were doing this. We couldn't look at Luke and Owen and pretend that things would get better on their own. We couldn't stand by and allow them to continue in an environment that had hurt them so deep, with adults who prioritized keeping up appearances over ensuring their safety. It's been nearly 2 weeks since we took action, and in that short span, life has transformed in ways we never anticipated. I can't disclose every detail because of the ongoing case, but the most crucial thing, the part that brings us the most comfort, is this. All of our nephews, Luke, Owen, Ryan, and Calvin, are finally safe under our roof. They're here, surrounded by family who genuinely loves and protects them, and they won't have to face the toxic environment they endured any longer. Having the boys with us feels both natural and strange. They've always been welcome here and have been frequent visitors since they were little, long before any of this heartache began. So while the circumstances of their staying here now are deeply troubling, the transition itself has been surprisingly smooth. In a way, it feels like we've all been preparing for this, without even realizing it, over years of family gatherings, movie nights, and sleepovers. But still, nothing could prepare any of us for the emotional weight of it all. The boys are visibly shaken, each in their own way, carrying the heavy memories of what they left behind. They're trying their best to settle in, but I can see how the upheaval has taken a toll. Luke, the oldest, is trying to put on a brave face for his younger brothers, but I can see the burden in his eyes. Owen is quieter than ever, lost in his thoughts, and Ryan seems caught in a tug-of-war between sadness and anger. Little Calvin, being so young, still doesn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. He only knows that he's away from home and that his mom and stepdad are in trouble. We're doing our best to create a stable environment for them, but there's only so much we can shield them from the reality of what's happening. As for Barbara and Reese, the fallout has been severe. They're facing serious charges related to their treatment of the boys, and the more we've learned, the worse it's become. There were things going on in that household that we never even imagined, details that haunt us now. It's beyond heartbreaking. My husband is livid. His anger has only grown as the truth has come out. He feels a deep sense of betrayal, not only as a brother who trusted Barbara to do right by her Ren, but also as an uncle who feels he failed to protect his nephews soon. Barbara has shown some remorse, but my husband sees through it, or at least he believes he does. He thinks her guilt only emerged because the consequences have finally caught up to her. And to be honest, I'm not sure I disagree. Her regret seems more like a reaction to being caught rather than a genuine recognition of the pain she inflicted. She's fighting to repair her reputation in the family, more than she's fighting to repair the damage done to her sons. Whether her remorse is real or just a response to the legal ramifications, I don't know. All I know is that I'm deeply relieved we acted when we did. It terrifies me to think how much worse things could have become if we hadn't intervened. Meanwhile, the family situation has fractured in ways that I'm not sure will ever fully heal. The fallout from our decision to go full nuclear has split the family down the middle. There are those who stand with us, who recognize that we acted in the boys' best interests, and who have offered us unwavering support throughout this entire ordeal. They're the ones who call, who show up with meals, who take the boys out to help them feel normal again, if only for a little while. Their support has been a lifeline, a reminder that even though we're in the midst of chaos, we're not completely alone in this. Then there are those who oppose us, who view our decision as a betrayal to Barbara. They argue that family matters should be kept within the family, that we went too far and that we're the ones tearing the family apart. To be honest, it's exhausting to even think about them. Their judgment and disapproval feel like a weight we shouldn't have to carry right now. They're so focused on preserving family image and maintaining loyalty that they can't, or won't, see the pain that the boys endure, or acknowledge that standing by in silence would have been an even greater betrayal. Dealing with this split has been one of the hardest parts of the entire situation. It's like grieving a family that's still here, but fundamentally changed. Those who oppose us are distant, unwilling to even entertain the idea that we acted out of love and necessity. They've made their stance clear, and we've stopped trying to sway them. We've accepted that we can't change their minds. They're locked into their beliefs, so set on upholding family loyalty that they can't understand our decision was rooted in a different kind of loyalty, the loyalty to protect and care for our nephews when their own parents would. Logistically, having 4 extra people in our home has brought its own set of challenges, but we're managing. I won't sugarcoat it, things have been chaotic. It's hard balancing everyone's needs, especially with the boys each reacting to the situation in their own way. But despite the complexities, there's a strange sense of peace. There's this unspoken understanding that we're in this together, that we're creating a new sense of family, even if it's unconventional. We might not have all the answers, and every day brings new hurdle, but we're here, and we're doing our best. And in the quiet moments, as I watch my husband laugh with the boys, or see the way they're slowly beginning to trust us more deeply, I'm reassured that we made the right choice. I know that this journey is far from over, that there will be more challenges and more family battles to face. But no matter what, I know this was the path we had to take. We couldn't ignore the signs or pretend the boys were safe when families should protect, not hurt. And if it takes dismantling old, harmful loyalties to build a safer, more loving environment, then so be it. The final chapter of this roller coaster story unfolded in a way I never could have anticipated. Not long after I posted about our situation, Reese showed up at our front door, demanding that we send Luke and Owen back home with him. The audacity stunned me, but I knew better than to be intimidated. The boys were under our care, safe here, and there was no way I was going to let them go back to the environment that had done so much harm. It didn't take long for Reese to escalate. He grew loud and hostile, throwing a barrage of curses and insults at me and the boys, his face red with anger. My husband wasn't home at that moment. He had stepped out to pick up some clothes and toiletries for the boys, who hadn't had a chance to gather their things. I can only guess that Reese felt emboldened by my husband's absence, thinking that he could intimidate me into doing what he wanted. But when he realized I wasn't backing down, something in him snapped. Out of nowhere, he sucker punched me right in the mouth. In that instant, all the fear and frustration I'd been bottling up for weeks came surging forward. I saw red, pure and simple. I'm not usually one to lash out, but in that moment, my protective instincts took over. Without even thinking, I swung back. It wasn't my finest moment, and it definitely wasn't the smartest move, but something inside me refused to let him think he could hurt me and get away with it. Reese looked stunned, completely caught off guard. He clearly hadn't expected a fight from me, and he stumbled back, scrambling to regain his balance. I wasn't sure if I'd hurt him much, but his shock was enough to make him rethink his bravado. Without another word, he spun around and dashed back to his car, speeding off down the street. The boys were shaken, but they reacted quick, calling my husband and letting him know what had happened. I called 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher, and within minutes, officers were on their way. My lip was swelling by then, and while it looked far worse than it actually felt, my husband was insistent that I get checked out at urgent care. The police met us there, and it was during that visit that we laid out everything we'd been holding back. We reported Reese's assault, as well as the months of neglect and abuse the boys had endured. The very next day, both Reese and Barbara were taken into custody. The weight of everything that had happened over these past few weeks seemed to come crashing down all at once. And though it was difficult to process, there was also a deep sense of relief. Finally, the boys were safe. Finally, There was some accountability for the pain they had suffered. But as if that wasn't enough, there was one more surprise waiting for me at urgent care. As part of the routine intake process, the nurse ran a pregnancy test, and it came back positive. I was floored. I hadn't been feeling any different. No symptoms, nothing to indicate that a new life had begun within me. But there it was, clear as day. I was pregnant. It was still so early that I hadn't had a clue, but the news filled me with an unexpected wave of hope amid the turmoil. In a way, this new life seemed to symbolize a fresh start, not only for me and my husband, but also for our nephews, who had come to feel like an extension of our family. It felt like a sign, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a chance for new beginnings and brighter days. In the days that followed, the support we received from family, friends, and even strangers online became a lifeline. Your messages, advice, and words of encouragement gave us strength during some of the hardest moments. You helped us remember that we weren't alone in this, that there were people who understood our pain and supported our choice to protect these boys. Every message mattered, and knowing that we had a community behind us brought us more comfort than I can put into words. Since Reese and Barbara were taken into custody, we've been working closely with social services and the legal system to ensure that the boys have a stable and loving home environment. They're still with us, and though it's been a rocky adjustment, we're all finding our way. Luke, Owen, Ryan, and Calvin each have their own journey of healing ahead of them, but they're starting to settle in, and we're making sure they have the support they need every step of the way. Luke, in particular, has been opening up more, and we're finally seeing glimmers of the ambitious, hopeful young man he used to be before everything spiraled out of control. Owen, who was once so withdrawn, has started to show a bit more confidence, and he's been connecting more with my husband, who's taken on a mentor role with him. Ryan is still grappling with anger and frustration, but we're helping him work through those emotions in a healthy way, reminding him that he's safe here, that he doesn't have to carry the weight of his parents' mistakes. As for Calvin, his world is still very small, and while he's confused by everything that's happened, he's adjusting well, finding joy in the simple things like bedtime stories and baking cookies together in the kitchen. We're letting him stay innocent a little longer, trying to give him a hood free of the fear and instability he's known up until now. It's surreal, knowing that our family has changed forever. We've gained 4 young souls who need us, and while our path forward is uncertain, we're embracing this new chapter with open arms. We may have lost connections with certain family members who disapproved of our actions, but we've gained so much more. 4 incredible boys who now know what it feels like to be truly loved and supported. And of course, there's the new addition on the way, a tiny life that reminds us every day that our story, despite its twists and turns, is just beginning. There's hope here in the laughter that's returning to our home, in the moments we share as a family, and in the knowledge that we stood up for what was right no matter the cost. Thank you to everyone who offered their support, guidance, and encouragement. It has meant the world to us, and it has given us strength on days when it felt like we had none left. We are moving forward, not with the family we expected, but with the family we chose to protect. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.